At 2:17 on a freezing January night in 1945, deep in the pine-choked forest south of Königsbruck, Saxony, a lone American scout crouched in the ruins of an abandoned farmhouse. Its roof collapsed, its beams charred black, its windows blown out by shell fire. Snow drifted through the cracks like ghostly ash. Private First Class Henry Locke, 22 years old, poorly armed and widely underestimated, gripped the strange, compact weapon resting across his knees. It wasn't a standard M1 Garand. It wasn't a Thompson. It wasn't anything his squad mates respected. It was a cut-down improvised toy rifle, a heavily modified M1903 Springfield carbine he'd shortened with a hacksaw and rebalanced with homemade counterweights. The barrel stub looked comical. The handguard was sawed too thin. The bolt had been filed down to reduce friction. His squad leader had laughed outright. "Locke, that thing looks like something a kid made in his dad's shed." The Germans laughed at it too, whenever they captured one. A joke weapon, a useless carbine, nothing dangerous. They were wrong, because Locke hadn't built it to be pretty. He had built it to be silent. Tonight, behind enemy lines, that silence was everything. A cold wind hissed through the broken doorway. Henry pressed himself deeper into shadow, watching through a gap in the wall as distant lanterns bobbed between the trees. German Fallschirmjäger, elite paratroopers, pushing a night patrol straight toward him. 40, maybe 50 men. Too many to fight. Too trained to evade. Henry steadied his breathing. He checked the suppressor. Handmade from stacked drilled washers and an oil-soaked cloth wrap. Crude, ugly, but effective enough at close range. He cocked the bolt with 2 fingers, the motion barely audible. The mission was simple. Slip through German lines, confirm the location of a hidden railgun bunker, and return before dawn. But something had gone wrong. Radio contact with his squad had vanished. Artillery markers had stopped responding. And now, an entire company of elite German troops was sweeping the forested ruins, searching for him. Henry knew he couldn't outrun them, couldn't outshoot them in open combat. But in the dark, with a weapon no one believed in, he could outthink them. Because Locke's toy rifle wasn't a toy at all. It was a blueprint for chaos, a tool designed to exploit acoustics, shadows, and confusion. And before the night was over, 47 elite German troops would learn exactly what it could do. The first German patrol entered the farmhouse perimeter quietly, too quietly for regular infantry. Locke recognized the gate immediately. Light boots, careful heel-to-toe advancement, breathing controlled even in cold air. Fallschirmjäger, veterans, predators. Henry slid flat against the interior wall, using the collapsed rafters to break his silhouette. The moonlight leaking through the broken roof cast hard angles across the floor. Angles he had already mapped in his mind. 3 paratroopers approached the doorway, one with an MP40, one with a flashlight clipped to his belt, one whispering orders in a low Saxon accent. Henry pressed his thumb against a tiny tension screw embedded in the side of his carbine, one of his odd little modifications. The screw wasn't structural. It controlled a makeshift damping plate inside his improvised suppressor. Turning, it altered the sound signature. Not quiet versus loud, but quiet versus misleading. He rotated the screw a quarter turn. The Germans reached the doorway. Henry fired once. A faint thump echoed through the empty farmhouse. Except the echo didn't bounce correctly. The suppressor plate redirected the pressure wave upward through the collapsed ceiling, making the shot sound as if it came from the rafters rather than the floor. The lead German spun upward, firing a burst into the roof beams. Splinters rained down. The second paratrooper stepped forward to illuminate the attic. Henry fired again. Thump. The round hit the man square in the throat. He dropped silently. The third German panicked, shouting, firing wild as shadows. He backed into the doorway. Henry lunged, grabbed the man's collar, and pulled him inside to prevent an outside watcher from noticing. 1 minute, 3 soldiers. None of them knew where the shots came from. Henry dragged the bodies behind a toppled cabinet and reloaded with soft, steady movements. The cold bit into his gloves, but his breathing stayed controlled, rhythmic, measured. He listened. More Germans approached, not cautiously, now angrily, boots cracking on snow. Orders whispered in clipped bursts. A squad leader barking. The shooter is in the rafters. Watch the ceiling. Henry smiled faintly. His trick had worked. He skirted across the rubble to the far wall, staying in blind spots between moonlight beams. He rotated the tension screw another notch, altering the suppressor resonance again. This setting would mimic a roof shot. It would mimic distance. The next group of Germans reached the farmhouse exterior. 2 groups of 4, fanning out tactically. A senior NCO raised binoculars, scanning the windows for muzzle flash. Henry placed his carbine through a narrow hole in the wall. Fired once. Thup, pop. The suppressor plate split the sound. A soft thup inside. A faint pop ricocheting off distant trees. The Germans flinched. Then, unbelievably, they turned away from Henry's actual position. Contact. At the tree line. Move. 4 false Germans sprinted toward the woods, expecting a sniper 200 meters out. The others crouched behind a stone trough, eyes fixed on the wrong direction. Henry exhaled slowly. He moved to the opposite side of the farmhouse, silent, efficient, almost ghost-like. He found a broken window frame, providing a perfect flank. Elias would have said something clever. Mercer might have joked about leverage. But Henry Locke said nothing. He simply fired. Again and again, each shot sounding like it came from a different tree, ridge, or shadow. The Germans faltered. One shouted, "WAVL? How many shooters?" Another yelled, "At least 5. Spread out." They were guessing, and their guesses were wildly wrong. Locke moved between firing points with unnerving fluidity, using his sawed-off carbine not as a rifle, but as a sound sculpting tool. Each suppressed round chipped away at their cohesion. 1 man fell behind the old well. 2 dropped near the stable door. Another crumpled beside a shattered cartwheel. Henry checked his count. 9 down. No alert flares. No coordinated response. The elite paratroopers weren't outgunned. They were outmatched by perception. And perception in the dark woods killed faster than bullets. Then it happened. A German voice, older, controlled, shouted from deeper in the forest. "Halt. Do not fire. Listen." Henry froze. That voice meant trouble. It belonged to someone calm under pressure. Someone who wasn't fooled by misdirection. Boots approached with deliberate precision. Not rushing. Not panicked. A figure stepped into view. A tall German officer wearing a false German raincoat, binoculars hanging low, and P-40 slung at his hip. He knelt beside one of the bodies, studied the wound, then studied the snow around it. He wasn't guessing. He was reconstructing. Henry's heart tightened. This man was dangerous. The officer stood and spoke quietly. "It is 1 shooter, not 5, and he is close." He pointed directly at the farmhouse. Henry realized something else. This officer had brought reinforcements. He could hear them now. Boots, gear, whispered radio calls. An entire platoon closing a ring around the ruins. Henry's advantage, confusion, was slipping away. The officer raised his MP-40. "Advance. Surround the structure. No one escapes." Henry tightened his grip on the carbine. He whispered to himself, "All right, Locke. Time for a new trick." Henry slid back into the shadows of the ruined farmhouse as the German officer's voice echoed through the trees. Calm, deliberate, deadly certain. Outside, Boots shifted into formation. Snow crunched in carefully timed sequences. Metallic clicks rolled through the forest as MP-40 bolts were drawn back. The officer wasn't guessing anymore. He knew exactly where Henry was, which meant Henry's first advantage, acoustic deception, was nearly gone. Nearly. Not completely. Henry crouched behind a collapsed beam and adjusted the tiny tension screw on his suppressor again. But this time he turned it further than he ever had before. So far, the damping plate inside tilted to one side. This setting wasn't meant to misdirect. It was meant to break. The next shot wouldn't sound like a roof echo, or a distant ricochet, or a tree line snap. It would sound like 2 shooters firing at once, because the suppressor plate, now off-center, would split the muzzle pressure into 2 distinct acoustic trails. A stuttering waveform, a double blip. It would also risk blowing the suppressor apart. Henry didn't have a choice. A dozen false Germans advanced toward the farmhouse, weapons raised. moving with chilling coordination. They'd stopped shouting, stopped guessing. Now, they were hunting. Henry breathed once, slow, deep, steady. He popped up behind the collapsed window frame. Fired. Thup, thup. The suppressor coughed a distorted double sound. One pulse bouncing straight out, another whipping sideways through the fractured metal. Outside, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The squad on the right flank spun toward the forest. The squad on the left flank spun toward the roof. The officer barked, furious. Neen. Stop, stop, it is a trick. But the damage was done. 2 Germans broke formation to chase the second shooter. 3 dove for cover behind a stone trough. 1 man fired blindly toward the attic. Henry shifted positions fast, ducking low to avoid the officer's accurate return fire. A burst of MP40 rounds shredded the beam inches above his head, showering him in dust. He rolled to the next firing point, took aim through a jagged hole in the brick, fired again. Thup, THUP. The double blip scattered the Germans even further. A false charger on the left flank screamed, "Zwei Schutzen, there are 2. The officer roared, "No, it's 1. 1. No one listened. Henry snapped the bolt, breath calm, hand steady. 16 down. Platoon in disarray. Officer losing control. But the Germans adapted faster than regular infantry. They regained formation frighteningly quick, tightening their arc, not falling for the same trick twice. Henry ducked behind a ruined doorframe as another wave of coordinated MP40 fire stitched the farmhouse exterior. Splinters cracked like brittle bones. Glass shards tinkled into the snow. The officer moved closer, slowly, methodically, studying every angle of the building. He wasn't going to be fooled again. Henry whispered, "All right, lock phase 2. He crawled to the back corner where a broken stovepipe leaned against the wall, its metal bent, hollow, and pointing toward a second room. He shoved the suppressor's muzzle into the pipe's opening. The pipe rattled softly against the brick. Henry adjusted the tension screw once more, not to create deception, but amplification. He braced himself, closed his eyes, fired. THUP. Hum, ping. The stovepipe threw the sound out like a miniature cannon, amplified, distorted, and launched at a completely different angle. It echoed across the ruins and out toward the far tree line. Immediately, the Germans reacted. 3 men broke formation. 2 redirected fire toward the empty shack behind the farmhouse. 1 tossed a grenade into a shadow where no one stood. Henry used their confusion with surgical speed. He shifted to the opposite corner, fired again without the pipe. Thup, quiet, sharp, clean, dropping 2 soldiers before they even registered the shot. The officer finally snapped. Form a wall. Advance to the house. Step by step. They did, moving with terrifying discipline now. Shields of overlapping firepower pressing inward. They swept both flanks, drove inward with grenades, closing off Henry's escape routes. Henry checked his ammo. 7 rounds left. 40 men still alive. The perimeter nearly sealed. Outside, he could hear Germans stacking up on both entrances. The officer called out, "You are alone. Surrender, Americaner. You have fought well, better than your weapon suggests. But this ends now." Henry didn't answer. He sprinted, not outward, but upward, climbing a broken support beam, then hauling himself into the exposed attic lattice. Snow dusted his coat. Wind cut through the open rafters. Below him, Germans stormed the lower floor. Henry adjusted the suppressor one last time, a setting he had never used before. It didn't distort sound, didn't amplify, didn't mimic distance. It deadened it, a nearly perfect vacuum of noise. Henry lined up through a gap in the ceiling floorboards, waited. A German stepped beneath him. Another, another. Henry fired. Take, a whisper, barely audible. The Germans didn't hear it, but they felt it when their man fell silently in the middle of their formation. The officer recoiled in shock. "He is above you. Move." Henry fired again. Another man dropped. Chaos erupted. Grenades failed to detonate properly in the rubble. MP40s fired upward blindly. Germans collided in panic as the silent shots carved into their ranks. Henry moved across beams like a predator in the dark, Silent rifle, silent steps, silent devastation. His count rose. 22, 26, 30, 35. Each kill was deliberate, each movement precise, each sound manipulated. The officer realized the truth too late. He controls the sound. Henry reloaded his final 3 rounds. Snow drifted through the collapsed roof. The officer called out, no longer confident. Americaner, who are you? Henry whispered, barely audible, just a guy with a toy rifle. Then he dropped from the rafters. Henry landed like a collapsing shadow, boots hitting the debris-strewn floor with a crunch that was swallowed by gunfire, shouting, and the crackle of burning rafters. The remaining false charger recoiled, stunned by his sudden appearance, some slipping on shattered tiles as they scrambled to reorient. The German officer barked. Halbkreis, form a half circle. Cut him off. 6 men obeyed instantly. Elite troopers, far more disciplined than the rest. They fanned out, covering one another, locking Henry into a tightening crescent. Henry didn't flinch. He stepped backward into a long, jagged beam of moonlight, deliberately revealing his silhouette, deliberately offering them a clear shot. Elias would have called it suicidal. Mercer would have recognized the physics of misdirection. Henry was doing neither. He was giving them the target so he could give the sound somewhere else. As the Germans raised their MP-40S, Henry flicked his thumb across the tension screw for the very last time. The suppressor was nearly ruined. Plates dented, cloth wrapping frayed, alignment warped. But the internal baffle still had one final trick left in it. Henry fired. TH crack. The suppressor stuttered, splitting the muzzle blast into 2 parts. A near-silent whisper by Henry's boots, and a hard, metallic crack 30 feet to his left, as the upper baffle deflected the pressure wave into the broken furnace grate. The Germans reacted instantly. They all fired toward the grate. Flashes filled the farmhouse. Hot brass skittered across the floor. Dust clouds erupted from shattered stone. Henry walked sideways into the smoke. He didn't rush, didn't sprint. He flowed, moving with soft, soundless precision through the confusion he himself had crafted. The first German never even saw him. Henry's carbine barrel pressed under his chin. 1 THP, and the man fell like a puppet with cut strings. The second turned too late. Henry shot him through the ribs, the muzzle whispering. The third panicked, firing blind into the roof. Henry slid behind him, hooked the man's arm with his elbow, and drove the bolt handle of his rifle into the base of the man's skull. 3 down. The crescent collapsed. The remaining false charger stumbled backward, realizing the trap too late. The German officer shouted. He moves without sound. Spread out, spread out. Henry didn't give them space. He moved toward the officer, each footstep placed on the debris with surgical care, each breath controlled, his silhouette slipping between shadows. He fired again, twice. Take. 2 more paratroopers dropped. Then another. 42. The officer's voice lost its composure. Retreat. Back to the eastern. Henry stepped out of the smoke. Too late. The officer froze, eyes wide. He finally understood Henry Locke wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a sniper team. It wasn't a multi-man infiltration unit. He was a single soldier with a weapon designed not to kill louder, but to kill smarter. The officer ripped his MP-40 upward, but Henry fired first. Cape. The officer staggered, clutching his hip, wounded, but alive. He dropped to one knee, breathing hard. Henry approached slowly, not triumphant, not mocking, just tired. The officer spat blood into the snow. Your weapon is abomination. No regulation, no discipline, no honor. Henry didn't argue. He knelt in front of the officer, eyes calm. You mocked my rifle, Henry said quietly. You weren't the first, but you'll be the last. The officer looked up, furious, terrified, defiant all at once. Who trained you, he whispered. Henry shook his head. No one. I just listen. Sound tells you everything. The officer's eyes narrowed. You killed 40. He swallowed. 40-something of my men. 47, Henry corrected. The officer stiffened. Then Henry did something unexpected. He lowered his rifle. You're wounded. You won't survive the night if the cold takes you. But you have a choice. Tell me where the railgun bunker is, and I'll leave you a fire and a chance." The officer studied him with a strange respect, a warrior's recognition of another. He pointed toward a cluster of ridgelines south of the forest. "Behind the quarry," he rasped. "Tunnel beneath the old mine." Henry nodded. Then he stood, leaving the officer with his life. He turned toward the ridge and prepared to disappear into the forest. Silently, like the specter the Germans believed he was. But as he reached the doorway, the officer shouted weakly, "Americaner, your rifle, it is not a toy." Henry paused, turned halfway. "It never was," he said. Then he vanished into the night, leaving 47 elite German troops behind, silenced by a weapon no one had ever taken seriously. Snow fell heavier as Henry Locke slipped deeper into the Saxon forest, the darkness swallowing him like a long exhale. The trees muffled distant gunfire. Smoke from the burning farmhouse drifted above the canopy in long, fading streaks. Behind him lay 47 elite German paratroopers, silent, scattered among the ruins, victims of a rifle everyone had laughed at. But the night wasn't over. Henry checked his compass, adjusted his scarf, and pressed forward. His breath fogged the air in slow, disciplined intervals, measured, controlled quiet. Every step he took avoided branches, avoided crunching brush, avoided anything that could betray his presence. He wasn't just moving through the forest. He was owning its silence. A faint orange glow appeared ahead, firelight reflecting off stone. Henry crouched, slipping behind a ridge. Below him opened a narrow ravine lined with jagged shale. At its base lay a cluster of abandoned mining machinery and rail tracks, half swallowed by snow. And beyond it, exactly where the officer had said, a tunnel cut into the hillside. Canvas camo nets, 2 sentries, and a steel blast door recessed into the stone. The German railgun bunker. Henry's heart tightened. If the coordinates were accurate, the railgun could strike Allied supply lines all the way back to Belgium. A weapon like that could stall entire operations. He crept to the ravine's edge and studied the sentries. Routine, bored, but alert enough that a direct approach was suicide. Henry unslung his carbine, his battered, ugly, brilliantly effective creation. Snow had collected inside the suppressor wrap, but the tension screw still turned, barely. Only 3 rounds remained. He whispered to himself, "Make them count." He rotated the screw halfway, feeling the internal baffle scrape softly. The suppressor was dying. One more shot at most before it ripped apart. But Henry wasn't aiming for silence this time. He was aiming for confusion. He lined up on the first sentry, braced against a pine trunk, and fired. TH clip. The shot cracked not loudly but strangely, a 2-tone sound that slapped against the ravine walls and ricocheted upward. The bullet hit the sentry cleanly, dropping him instantly. The second guard jerked around in confusion, looking up the ridge instead of across it. He shouted in German, "Above US." The shot came from above. Henry smirked. 1 round left in the illusion chamber. He fired again. THP clang. This time the baffle kicked the pressure wave behind the guard, bouncing it off an old steel or cart. The guard panicked, fired wildly into the shadows behind himself, emptying half a magazine at nothing. Then a third German, previously unseen, burst from the tunnel, weapon raised. Henry moved from cover, swift, precise, and angled downhill. He had only 1 unsuppressed round left. He chambered it. This shot would be loud, very loud, but he needed the power and penetration. He braced the carbine against a boulder, exhaled, and fired. Bang. The round hit the German square in chest, knocking him backward into the tunnel mouth. The echo roared through the ravine, raw, metallic, terrifying. Inside the bunker, silhouettes scrambled. Shouted orders echoed outward. "Attack! Attack! We are under attack!" Henry gripped his rifle tighter. The railgun crew believed a full Allied assault was underway. Good. Henry sprinted down the ravine, slipping past the panicked sentry, still firing at ghosts. When he reached the bunker entrance, he grabbed a discarded stick grenade, primed it, and tossed it inside. The explosion thundered through the tunnel. Screams echoed off steel. Sparks rained from shattered wiring. Henry rushed in through the smoke. He saw the railgun, massive, mounted on a reinforced track. Its loading breech open, crew scrambling for cover. Before they could react, Henry kicked a burning oil toward the hydraulic pump. Flames blossomed. Heat surged. The railgun's ammunition cart, stacked with propellant charges, caught fire. Henry ran. He sprinted back up the ravine, lungs burning, boots slipping on snow and shale. Behind him, fire crawled up the gun's frame like a living thing. He reached the ridgeline, turned, and the rail gun detonated. A shock wave punched through the forest, scattering snow from branches. Shards of steel shrieked across the ravine, embedding in stone. Henry ducked behind a tree as the fireball tore through the night sky, illuminating the forest like a second sunrise. Silence returned slowly, ash drifting down like dark snow, embers fluttering across the ravine floor. Henry checked his rifle. Only the bolt remained intact. The suppressor had split. The barrel was warped. The stock cracked. The toy rifle was dead. He sighed, slung the ruined weapon over his shoulder, and started back toward Allied lines. Behind him, the railgun burned. Ahead of him, a faint orange glow rose. American flares. Search teams. He walked toward the light. When they found him exhausted and half-frozen, they couldn't believe his report at first. One man, one rifle, 47 elite troops, and a railgun destroyed. But they believed the scorch marks on his coat, the metal fragments embedded in his sleeves, and the silence with which he carried himself. Henry Locke didn't boast, didn't dramatize, didn't celebrate. He just said, "Mission complete." 30 minutes later, he finally collapsed. Snowflakes drifted across Henry's vision as medics hauled him toward a makeshift aid post, their boots crunching through the frosted underbrush. The trees above glowed dimly with the orange reflection of the destroyed railgun still burning in the ravine. The forest crackled with distant fire. Smoke curled lazily toward the stars. Henry's mind fought to stay conscious, not out of pride, not out of fear, but because he could feel something wrong, something unfinished. He grabbed the medic's sleeve. "Stop, stop, I'm not done." The medic frowned. "Locke, you're half frozen. You inhaled smoke. You need..." Henry cut him off. "Count the men." The medic blinked. "What?" "Count the patrol searching for me." "How many did you bring?" "7. "Why?" Henry closed his eyes, forcing his brain to work through the fog. 7 wasn't enough. Not nearly. He was still behind enemy lines, still in the middle of German territory, still surrounded by units that would have heard the explosion. The railgun's destruction wasn't the end. It was the signal. The German officer, wounded but alive, would report what happened. Nearby units would mobilize. They would swarm the forest, searching for the silent ghost, the phantom sniper who had dismantled an elite platoon and destroyed a railway superweapon alone. Henry forced himself upright, gripping a tree for balance. "We have minutes before they get here," he said hoarsely. "They'll come in force. They'll think a full American battalion hit them. They'll expect numbers." The medic swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Henry stared through the trees, listening to the shifting wind. "They'll be looking for footprints, for drag marks, for movement, for anything." He scanned the snow. Then he heard it, a faint, distant rumble. Boots, multiple squads, moving fast. Henry stiffened. They're sweeping in 3 groups, 2 flanking, 1 center. The sergeant of the search team frowned. "We didn't hear anything." Henry pointed at his ears. "I spent the entire night learning how these would sound. Trust me." The sergeant tightened his grip on his M1. "Suggestions?" Henry turned back toward the ravine, toward the burning wreckage that lit the mountainside in unnatural orange. "They think there was a major raid," Henry said. "We need to make them think the raiders are still here." The medic stared at him. "Henry, your rifle is broken. You can't fight anymore." Henry looked at the shattered weapon slung over his shoulder. Its barrel warped. Suppressor split, wide open like a burst fruit. "I don't need to shoot," he said. "I just need to sound like I can." The sergeant blinked. "Sound like you can?" Henry knelt, scooping up a handful of debris. metal fragments, pieces of stovepipe, cracked barrel sleeves from the railgun's wreckage. He held them up. "These ring," he murmured. "They echo. They sing against each other." The medic frowned. "What are you saying?" Henry stood, eyes sharpening. "We're going to fake a mechanized unit." The sergeant stared. "You're insane." Henry pointed to the burning railgun. "The Germans already believe a large American force hit them. They're confused. They're angry. They're trying to re-establish control. If they think we're still here, and in numbers, they'll halt their advance, form defensive lines, and wait for reinforcements." "Which buys us time," the sergeant said slowly. Henry nodded. "Hours. Maybe enough to get everyone out." He turned to the shattered stovepipe lying near the ground. He lifted it, tapped the warped metal with a rod. Gong, gong, gong. The sound rolled through the ravine like tank tread plates rattling. 3 soldiers froze in place, staring. Henry hit it again. The echoes bounced around the forest in thick, industrial waves. Heavy, clanging, unmistakably mechanical to anyone hearing it from a distance. The sergeant's eyes widened. That actually sounds like armor moving." Henry nodded. "Good. Now help me." The team followed his lead. A corporal struck 2 steel rails together, generating a rhythmic clack, 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 like the shifting of a turret gear. Another soldier dragged a bent iron plate across stone, producing a grinding shriek like metal tracks biting into rock. Henry used a broken pipe to produce deep, rolling booms, imitating the cadence of diesel engines. Altogether, the noise sounded wrong to them, but to someone hundreds of yards away in the dark, it sounded like tanks, like infantry carriers, like an entire mechanized platoon repositioning in the burning forest. And right on cue, German voices carried through the trees. "Panzer? Panzer, I am walled. Regroup. Defensive positions, withdraw. Back, back. Hold the ridge." Henry allowed himself one exhausted smile. The medic grabbed his arm. Henry, they're falling back. But Henry's knees buckled. The adrenaline evaporated. His vision darkened around the edges. The last thing he heard before collapsing was the metallic ring of the stovepipe echoing across the forest. A dying rifleman's illusion, strong enough to turn back a German counterattack. The sergeant caught Henry as he fell. "Let's get him home," he said softly. Henry Locke woke in a field hospital 2 days later, his vision blurred by morphine and exhaustion. His hands wrapped in gauze where the freezing metal and shattered suppressor had burned him. The world around him hummed with quiet conversation. Medics shuffling between cots, officers whispering over casualty lists, a pot of weak coffee steaming near a lantern. A chaplain sitting nearby looked up as Henry stirred. "You're awake," he said gently. "About time." Henry blinked. "Did everyone make it back?" The chaplain nodded. "All of them. Your little deception kept an entire German regiment from pushing into the ravine. They dug in on the ridge and waited half a day for armor that didn't exist." Henry exhaled, sinking back into the cot. "What about the railgun?" A new voice answered from the tent's entrance. "That railgun is a memorial candle now." Captain Hargrove, his commanding officer, stepped inside, uniform still dusted with ash from the previous day's reconnaissance. He carried a clipboard under one arm and Henry's shattered carbine under the other, or what remained of it. The suppressor was torn open like a peeled can. The barrel bent. The stock cracked straight down the middle. The tension screw, miraculously, still intact. Hargrove set it gently on Henry's blanket. "Engineering took one look at this thing," he said, "and half the unit thinks you're either a genius or a lunatic." Henry's eyes drifted over the ruined weapon. He felt something bittersweet. "It wasn't genius," he said quietly. "It was necessity." Hargrove crossed his arms. "Well, necessity killed 47 elite paratroopers, destroyed a long-range railgun, rerouted enemy reinforcements, and prevented a counterattack into our flank." He paused. "We've put you in for a Silver Star, possibly more." Henry didn't smile. He just asked, "What happened to the officer, the one who survived?" Hargrove tapped his clipboard, found by a German medical team at dawn. He refused evacuation until he'd given a full report. Apparently, he told his superiors he encountered He glanced down, reading, "Silent American Phantom." Henry let out a tired breath. Not far from truth. The chaplain chuckled. Well, it's one way to be remembered. But Henry shook his head. Remember the men I fought, he said. They were trained, brave, disciplined. They died because they were lied to by sound, not because they were weak. Hargrove studied him a moment, then nodded with respect. We'll make sure the record honors that. Henry closed his eyes, letting the tension finally leave his shoulders. The weight he carried, the loneliness of the mission, the silence of the kills, the brutal necessity of it all, lifted only a fraction. But it was enough. A nurse approached. You need rest, she whispered. Henry opened his eyes one last time. What about my rifle? Hargrove held it up gently. This thing? Son, no museum would believe it. Henry gave a quiet, cracked smile. Maybe that's for the best. It's not a weapon you copy. It's a lesson. The chaplain tilted his head. A lesson about improvisation? Henry shook his head. A lesson about listening. Outside, snow melted into slush as the first rays of sun touched the eastern treeline. Smoke from the destroyed railgun drifted into the pale sky, like a memory being carried away. Henry slept again at last, not as a ghost of the forest, not as a phantom sniper, but as a soldier who survived a night no one else ever could. And long after the war, when stories of that bitter January night resurfaced in half-whispered veterans' halls and obscure footnotes, they all carried the same refrain. They mocked his toy rifle, and to the night it silenced nearly 50 elite troops and saved an entire flank of the Allied advance. If this story struck you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps more people discover these forgotten, unbelievable wartime moments. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether anyone in your family served in World War II. And if you want more cinematic, long-form war stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.